Hello, everybody, and welcome to another. I don't know what we're doing, but occasionally I get together with these here friends, and we talk about things that are happening in the BookTube community, in the book community on Book Twitter. And so, because we did this one time all together, and then Paige and I did something similar, I was like, wouldn't it be fun to get together and kind of do a look back on 2020? Because a heck of a lot happened. So I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves. I'm Marines. You guys are on my channel, and starting with Sajid. Introductions.
I'm Sajid. I'm from the channel Books on My Social Life.
And hi, I'm Paige from Minimal Bookie.
I'm Deboki from Okie Dokie Boki.
And we don't have a channel, like a group name yet. Suggestions are welcome. I guess I wanted to start talking about this, kind of addressing the fact that I called this like 2020 bookish drama is like the thing that I called it. And this idea of like what drama is within the community, because I feel like that is the best shorthand, I think, for people to understand like the sort of inter-community or interpersonal things that happen. But a lot of times I think that label gets applied sort of like one size fits all. And sometimes it's like really important discussions and things that are happening. And people are like, ugh, here comes drama again. When it's like, no, wait, hold on. Like dick soap and racism are not on the same level, but we call both of those like drama. You know what I mean? So I understand that like the label of drama is a little bit reductive, and sometimes tea, but I think that everybody kind of understands what we're talking about when we're saying drama.
Yeah, I feel like what you said about like there's two different levels to things. I feel like the stuff we normally get labeled as drama is like actual discussions that we're trying to have. And sometimes labeling it as drama is used to like negate the fact that it's actually a serious conversation and make it seem more trivial than it actually is, especially when it comes to like more like minorities talking about things and issues that they see. It's often like, oh, they're talking about it again because it makes people uncomfortable, and so therefore they're more willing to brush it aside. And that's something I've been struggling with specifically when I have these conversations. Drama, I like you said, like dick soap, anything that's funny I'll describe as like drama, but anything else I try to refer to it more as like discussions or like conversations within the community, just on my own personal account, to try to like change that.
Yeah. But it's why dick soap endures, because it's just like the closest, not quite victimless, but the closest we come to like a victimless crime, where like almost like the Hilaria Baldwin, where like there's the problematic part, but mostly it's just like what happened? Who like
it was a spectacle.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
The thing about drama is that like anything conflictual just gets labeled as drama. So the minute people start to kind of disagree with each other or have any kind of discourse that's like, well, I don't agree with what you're doing, or somebody calling somebody out for something, it's easy for people to just throw the term drama and, as you said, Paige, kind of trivialize it and, suck out the actual like substance in the conversation or obscure it.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too is this like idea of like, we each reach our personal limits with like a discussion where we're like, oh, all right, already. Like, I don't want to hear. But then people try to like apply that to the conversation as a whole and say like, okay, the conversation's over, but you got to say your part. So now the conversation is over. Like, you know what I mean? Like that standard of like, who's to say when we've beat a dead horse? I don't know. But people like to kind of chime in with that once they're done with the conversation, even though there might be more to say. So I hope we're not beating any dead horses here today. I just thought it would be fun to kind of like look back and ask some questions and have a little bit more conversation about some of the things that happened in 2020. I did my best to kind of like look at a lot of things, but you guys, the year was never ending. we were all stuck inside apparently and just never got offline. And so I feel like an abnormal number of things happened because I don't know, we needed entertainment. I honestly don't know, but I did my best to collect as much as possible. If I'm forgetting anything, you guys are welcome to always add. And then in the comments, if I've forgotten or I've left out because I didn't include everything, one of your favorite things, you know, discussions, drama, tea, things that happened, let us know and we'll try and kind of get around to everything. Okay, so we're going to start with things that happened that were kind of reviewers versus authors. I feel like that this happens every year where we have at least one or two conversations that come up because an author has responded to a reviewer or engaged or interacted with a reviewer in some way that is kind of like, oh no. So one of the good things, good and bad things, are one of the, features of our communities as being bookish people online is that we do have access to authors, and authors have access to readers in a way that probably didn't exist as much before social media. So we start with something very recent. Gavin from the BookTube channel, How to Train Your Gavin, he posted his BookTube, like a staple video that was his worst reads of the year. He tweeted about it and said, here's my video about my worst of the year. And he started to receive responses from authors about how 2020 was hard enough and that worst list hurt authors' feelings. And it spiraled into like more subtweeting about who negative reviews are for and whether or not reviewers should do worst of the year lists and if they have value. Just a quick sort of take. I think, Sajid, you've already done your worst of the year. Did you? Devoki, are you doing one?
I think I'm doing like a highlights and lowlights video. That's kind of usually how I do it. Because I'm really bad at picking my best and my worst, so I kind of hedge.
Paige?
I'm probably going to do a tier ranking. So it'll essentially be everything in one video because efficiency.
Yeah.
I will also I'm going to do like a disappointments of the year because I just didn't read a lot of bad books because honestly, the year was bad enough that anytime I started reading a book that I was like, oh no, I just put it aside, which isn't usually my style. I usually finish it to the end so I can talk about it. But in 2020, it just wasn't happening. So I'm doing like disappointing reads, not necessarily worst. But I do have the collab that's coming out that is like a bunch of people doing their worst of the year. So we're all in for those. We'll talk about it a little bit more in just a second. But we also had Ellen Hildebrand, who a reviewer posted a review of a third book in her series and basically called it a hot mess. I'm being reductive here a little bit, but was basically like her books are a mess, but an entertaining one. Like I think the review said something like, I'm flipping pages so fast, I'm going to start a fire sort of thing. Like I can't look away, but also what the heck is happening? And she in the reviewer like used a bunch of hashtags in the review, and one was the author's name, hashtag Ellen Hildebrand. And so she found it, the author, and she responded to it by saying that it made her wish she had never been born. And she also told the reviewer that it was the holidays and people have feelings. Okay. So we're going to, one more that I remember from this year, and that was Fadwa, who is a book blogger and was doing a series on her channel or on her blog where she was interviewing authors of color. And so she would get arcs from the authors to sort of prepare for the interviews. And she received one of these arcs and DNF'd it. And she wrote like a sentence or two on Goodreads about why she DNF'd it, why the book wasn't for her. And the author found it and started subtweeting Fadwa, like didn't mention her, but was like, I was going to do this interview. And I basically got conned out of an arc for this interview. And then the blogger like bashed me on Goodreads, like the review was horrible. And then when people figured out what it was, and it was just like one sentence that was like, the book is not for me, they were like, you misrepresented this entirely, like what happened? So these are, I think, 3 examples of authors kind of stepping into reviewer spaces. So what do you guys think? Should authors ever respond to their reviews, whether negative or positive?
I feel like I straddle to like worlds because I like work professionally in publishing, but also I do talk about books online. And I agree, like authors should not be seeking out these kinds of reviews. Just avoid looking, if you don't think you can handle a negative review, just avoid searching them online. It's harder to say, like in practice, you probably harder to do that because you are gonna like be morbidly curious to see what people are saying about your work, but you can't directly address anything unless the person's tagged. Like I feel like if the person's tagged you in a positive review, they're giving you permission if they've tagged you in that review to like respond. But also on the other side of things, people do tag authors in reviews all the time that are negative, or just like in the photo itself with a negative review, and they don't often consider that as well. So I see like both perspectives of it. I just think like reviews are never for the author. They've never been for the author. They've always been for readers, even in like professional magazines and newspapers. So they don't really have a leg to stand on that front saying it's mean or unfair, because that's the whole point of reviewing, is to make sure other people know that this book may or may not be for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the one case where I've seen it where I'm like more like, I don't know, lenient or lax about it are the cases where authors are specifically addressing things that reviewers don't understand that are like culturally kind of connected, like stuff that people might not get about, like, you know, whatever the background is going into a particular plot point, a particular characterization, a particular arc. Like that's the one case where I'm like, okay, like I don't know if it's still always, especially like social media for authors should be first and foremost a marketing tool. Like whatever you want to say about, like, say for yourself, like it is also ultimately a way that people are going to be like understanding you and your book. So I think you have to be really cautious about it. But I've gotten like a lot of value out of authors being like, yeah, okay, well, this is a thing this reviewer doesn't understand, but like I will explain now this thing, and now I get a little bit more of the intention. That's for me like the one place where that kind of intent is useful. But otherwise I'm very like, I don't care. Like I have read your book, like I have my thoughts about it, and what your intent is like relevant to me up to a certain point, but I don't need you to address the reviews that people are writing about your book.
Yeah, I agree too, because I think, well, if you are a content creator of any sort and you put something out into the world, you have to prepare yourself for the fact that there will be some people who just will not vibe with your work. And it mightn't be that it's because your book is terrible or because you're a bad person. It's just that your book wasn't for that person. But I also see the point of authors who feel it necessary to kind of, address something that might be misunderstood. And an example of that I'm thinking of is, there was this author, Naomi Kanakia, I think. She published a book this year called We Are Totally Normal. And it was about a queer character, or a character who was kind of like curious or exploring his queerness. And by the end of the book, he kind of decided that he was straight. And I think a reviewer sort of misinterpreted the book and kind of said something along the lines of the book was being homophobic because the character decided that they were straight by the end of it. But the author kind of like clarified, well, like, no, that's not really what I was trying to do. I was just trying to kind of show that these things are complicated and they're complex, and sexuality is very vague and complicated. So the book wasn't like homophobic. It was just kind of like an exploration of how this particular character was exploring their sexuality. And then I remember another example with Samira Ahmed, who I think somebody had a negative review of her book, and they tagged her, and then they were saying a bunch of things about her because they didn't like that the characters in her book. So she's a Muslim writer, and her books feature Muslim characters, but the characters are often not very religious. And I think somebody in the review was basically saying how they don't think Samira Ahmed is a real Muslim or something along those lines. And that really got her angry, because it's like, you're completely leaving the book and now you're attacking the author. And they tagged the author too, right? So it's not like if she went looking for this review and they were basically saying, well, I don't think this author is like a real Muslim. So I think when reviewers kind of push the boundaries like that, or if they misinterpret something, or if they kind of like misinform other people about something, I think that's when it's appropriate for authors to kind of step in and say, well, no, this so-and-so is really the case. But otherwise, like, you don't need to be, fighting down every single person who dislikes your books for more or objective reasons.
Yeah. So a couple things here. One is that I think in the chat they clarified that Fadwa uses they them pronouns. So for moving forward, any discussion about that. I think too, we saw the author of Mexican Gothic, Silvia Moreno Garcia, had a similar situation where somebody was talking about the representation of a a seizure that happened in one of her books. And so this is like happening in the 1950s, I want to say. So one of the doctors or somebody around says to put like a spoon in the person's mouth in order to help with the seizure, because that was like an old wives sort of thing. I think mostly to keep the person from like kind of chattering their teeth or whatnot while having a seizure. And so somebody went and was like saying this is completely wrong or whatever. And so Silvia Moreno Garcia stepped in and said basically the same thing. I don't want to address the review of my work, but in context, here's what's actually happening in my book. Someone immediately tells this character that doesn't do anything, that's not helpful, and addresses the fact that this is not like something that you should do if somebody's having a seizure. So that's another instance I saw where an author stepped in that I was like, you're right, like clarify, like, because somebody at that point is misrepresenting your work. It's not about a review necessarily, but now it's like sort of misrepresenting either something about the author or the work itself. So I think that that's a great point. And also like, you know, reviewers who tag authors. If you tag an author, like you're asking for eyeballs on it, like you're sort of asking for something, I don't know.
And I feel like part of it too is because like the book was saying, it should be a marketing tool when you're using social media as an author, but there's a blurred line between it's social media, it's kind of personal. That's the whole point of it, is you're personally connecting to your readers, to your audience. And I feel like people forget that. And we've been seeing a lot of authors step back now and just use it as an update account and probably have like a private account elsewhere, which is honestly probably the way they should be doing things. You should not be on your main being messy. Please separate your personal from your like actual public account, and that will probably help you avoid the reviews that you don't want to see as well, like an added layer of like protection for you as a creative person.
So from the chat, people are saying authors can respond positive yes if they want to, negative no. If you're a writer, avoid all reviews if possible. And then even if a review is glowing, I feel weird when an author responds. It just feels like a line has been crossed. This is also me, unless I'm talking to an author like author, I loved your book, and they're like, thank you, then that's like an interaction I want to have. If my review is just out there and they find it, even if it's positive and they're like amazing, I'm like, oh,
it's very awkward.
I don't like this.
I feel like if you're tagging somebody, you want them to see and interact with you. Otherwise, like just appreciate it and move on, basically.
And I think in the context of like what we're talking about, like people or authors responding to booktubers who are leaving negative reviews, it's always a little bit funny to me because I'm like, have you seen the way people talk to people on YouTube directly in their comments, like at them? Like I've seen people leave really, really mean comments on my friends' channels just like because they think that that's like a direct, like they think that this is what they want to do with their direct line to someone. And so for me, like juxtaposing that thing against like someone leaving a negative review of a work that you put out in the world, knowing that it's going to get negative reviews, like there's something to me about that, that difference that I know it's a little bit unfair because they are different worlds and whatever, but like I always have that moment of just like being a little bit petty where I'm like, but would you make it on YouTube? Like
I know, that is true. I never really thought about it that way. And I mean, I was going to ask you guys this later, but if you were an author, or I know like Paige, you write. So, you know, one day I'm sure you would love to be published. Would you read your own reviews?
Yeah, because I'm dumb and I would do that to myself, but I would never interact with people. I don't want people to know I'm reading it. No, like unless you tag me, I will not. Like same with like, we all know like guru gossip and stuff like that exists where people talk about us. Good for them. Let them have their opinions about me as a person, about whatever I like put up online or like whatever I write in the future, because it's not on you as a creative person to control how other people interact with what you put out into the world. They have their own contacts, their own opinions. Just leave it. Like, no, don't do it.
I'm saying like 100% I would read my reviews. Like there's no way that I could know that information was out there and like me just be like, I'll never read it. Like I would 100% read it and then probably bother the crap out of my friends in like a private chat and be like, look at what this person said. Like
I would totally like screenshot reviews and send it to my friends and be like, look at what this crazy person said about my book. How could they say that? You know? But I would never like actually respond to any of the reviews. And reading reviews could actually be a good thing to some extent because you could have a general idea of like what people's thoughts on your books are. So it's not a terrible thing, but if you just go down the rabbit hole and you start interacting with people, that's when it crosses a line for me.
Yeah. So we're getting a lot of the same thing. Don't tag authors in bad reviews. Reviews are for readers, not authors. I gave a 3-star review on Goodreads and the author liked it. And it felt weird. I agree. If like an author liked a 3-star review of mine, I'd be like, oh no.
That feels passive aggressive almost.
Jocelyn says the same thing. It always baffles me that these situations come up when DMing your friends can avoid the whole thing entirely. Like, do you need a private chat? That's what needs to happen. Lala says she's had some well-known authors in her DMs responding to negative reviews. I'd almost rather they do it publicly if they're going to do it, so I have some backup. Yeah, because then you have to like out them, like screenshot the DM and be like, "Oh gosh, in my DMs, that would be literally horrible."
That's definitely an overstep for sure.
All right, so kind of moving on.
You'll get a
little
nice
bit.
block.
Well, and also like it's just like I've seen other authors who like seem to have a more reasoned take on this, like say like, you know, like point out like negative reviews are still helpful. So like even something that's critical of your work and that's being negative about it is not necessarily dissuading people from buying it. And like, yes, there are bad reviews that can maybe like completely, I don't know, trash your work forever. But like Twilight still succeeded. Like, so it's going to take a lot, I feel like, and for the most part. And so just like having, I think it would be really, really hard to like be able to like accept that this baby that you've put out into the world that is born of your brain and like has all of your ideas and feelings. And it would be hard to deal with the idea that somebody else doesn't like it. But like you've also had an incredibly fortunate thing happen of being able to put that out in the world. And so that doesn't mean you have to be okay with like people not liking it, but you have to like accept to a certain extent that people aren't going to like it. Like, and also that people not liking it is just like a function of the world. And like them not liking it publicly might mean that someone else who likes it will find it. Like I've definitely found books that I want to read from listening to someone else's negative review. So
yeah,
that's how reviews work.
I agree. And I was like, one of my questions is like, do these sort of like worst of lists, do they serve a purpose? Like, is there a place for them in the community? If you're on my channel, you know me at all, you get like, obviously, yes. I'm like one of these people that is like, I think that talking about why something doesn't work is just as valuable as talking about why something does work. And I find tons of reviews hearing people like, if you're sitting there saying, I hated this book, it was so description heavy, so wordy, like the magic, like these are all buzzwords that I'm like, wow, that book is for me. And so a negative review can definitely steer me to a good book. And I think apart from like worst lists serving the function of entertainment on YouTube, which is what we're here to do anyway, I think that they're, you know, can also serve our audiences in terms of, even if I didn't like this book, you may, or, hey, I didn't like this book, you may not either, save your money. And I think those are both very valid purposes.
Yeah, even when I like a book, I will always go and read like some of the negative reviews to see like what I liked may not have worked for somebody else. And I'm always curious to see like how did other people respond to this book. And I never take it personally if I really, really like a book and then a friend doesn't like it, because we all have very different reading tastes, so it totally makes sense. Yeah. And it's made me think sometimes of like the film industry and like reviews in that space, because you never see the same sort of blowback from like, say, the film, like the writers of the script writers and stuff, like to the people who are reviewing films negatively on YouTube, like the film review community. And I think it's because we view that as like entertainment, and people are viewing like what we put out more as like resources, or like they think it's more make or break. Like there's a differentiation for some reason between like film reviews and book reviews. And I was like very curious this past couple of weeks.
it's like a lot more personal too, because with like the film there's a whole team of people, whereas the book, it feels, it, even though it's not, it might feel like a directed attack towards the author, because once you say I don't like this book, what the author might hear is, I don't like this thing that you created, this thing that you labored over and worked hard over. And it's like, it's nothing personal, and it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It doesn't even mean that the book is bad or that you are untalented. It just means that it didn't work for me and I didn't like it.
I'm not sure I entirely like agree with the premise, because I definitely feel like I've seen a lot of like with the, like when Star Wars came out or like Marvel movies come out, and like, you know, or like even the most recent Wonder Woman, where there's like a lot of like this critical pushback, and like a lot of, you'll see like directors and actors be like very like kind of defensive in their posturing of like, you know, well, this is for the fans, and so they're the only opinions that matter. And I think that's their way of sort of sidestepping it and being like, it's just that we don't care about your opinion. That's fine. Like, you don't have to, like, genuinely, like, you are still making a buttload of money. Like, it actually, if it is just for the fans have paid for it, and you will get your next movie. But you do see that kind of thing. But I think, like you're saying, like, the thing that is very different is like, there is a team, so you get to kind of like spread the blame a little bit more. Like, it is different. And I think it's just, there's something about books where like people are so precious about them in a way that's a little bit different, that I think is kind of going to what you're saying, where like there's still like a difference in how people treat it, where they make it sound like you like marched into an author's backyard and like held up a sign, and you have to be like,
your book sucks.
I just didn't like it. I'm so, like, I want to say sorry, but like also like I just didn't like it. Like, I also don't like papaya. That's not papaya's fault. I just don't like it.
Yeah, I think it's a really, that difference is really strange, because I mean, I don't think you see it as often, we'll say. I won't say never, but that whole like, think of the authors, they're people, they have families and like mouths to feed. Like, that is such a thing that I almost always is coming from me when I see it from the book community, when there are negative reviews. Like, nobody's like, you know, think of Michael Bay. You know, like, he has mouths to feed. Like, I don't know why it is about like the book community and authors in specific that like sort of, I don't know, that conversation comes up when negative reviews are being discussed.
I think somebody brought up in the chat that maybe it's like due to the economics of everything, because authors are paid substantially less, and like these directors are making bank, and that's probably why they can be like, you're wrong, but also I'm still making millions, so whatever, I don't care.
Yeah,
so because they will never, I mean, like, not in the sense of like critiquing like professionally, where we would obviously see directors like talking back to like, say, a random newspaper that put it in a negative review, but like more like, I'm thinking of like Kenny JD, who does like bad movies in a beat and stuff like that, where they wouldn't attack somebody who's just on YouTube, a single channel, versus like what we see the authors directly interacting with like that one person.
Yeah. Okay, let me catch up on comments here, because apparently good things are happening. So Gavin is in the chat, or was, and says that he would have preferred a DM, to be honest, instead of being picked on by authors I didn't even know at the same time. Haha, felt really weird. So Lala has authors in her DMs, and she's like, do it publicly. And Gavin was like, DM me, because
but just go on Guru Gossip. Like, that is like the best. Like, just as an author, go there, make an account. I don't know if Guru Gossip wants them. That's like, you guys can decide. But like, that seems like the intermediate at this point.
So we have, being an author is a job, and as such, there should be a level of professionalism that they need to live up to. Fighting with reviewers is not professional. Clarifying something is. That is an amazing point, because yes, this is your job. Imagine if like at work, after your like yearly review, you started like fighting with your boss, or like talking about it on social media. Like, there's a level of like, that's not how it goes. And I know it's not one-to-one, because we're not these people's boss, but we are the end consumer. And so, I mean, this is the way that it works. If you, or at least in sort of, I don't know, society, how we set it up. But like, we review everything. You go to a bad restaurant, you leave a review. You watch a movie, you can do a review. You read a book, you can do a review. So I don't know. I think you kind of sign up for it when you make things. Like, you sign up for this sort of exchange.
Yeah, I see some people bringing up Nora Roberts versus Deborah, and I feel like that is like the one case. Like, first of all, Nora Roberts can slide into my DMs any day. Like,
Yes.
if she wants to like, tell me shit, just go for it.
Yeah, I did not really like her latest book. I gave it like a 2.5 or 3-star review. If she has an opinion on my review of her book, I want to hear it. She's the exception.
Yeah. But also the reason why Nora Roberts is Nora Roberts is because she's not wasting time on our reviews.
Yeah.
She's like, I got books to write. Like, I'm going to just keep being like me.
Okay, so we've got some questions I missed before. What are people's thoughts on responding positively to a negative review? Again, don't want it.
Yeah,
absolutely not. Don't do it.
I would kind of enjoy that.
The most I will take is a thank you on a positive review. Like, that's the most I'll take. Like, I don't need any elaboration because it just feels really awkward. It feels really weird.
Uh-huh. It's I don't know what's like a good metaphor for it. Like, if I'm giving Deboki a gift, and then Babe comes out of nowhere to comment on my gift or my gift giving, it's kind of like, this wasn't for you. Yeah. Like, I don't care if you think the gift I gave was good or bad, but like this exchange is not for you. So it's just weird in any case for an author to sort of just come in and insert themselves. Because it's like, no, I don't want to know. I don't want to hear it. Unless you're Nora Roberts.
Nora Roberts is the exception.
Yes. How do you feel about an author RTing a review but not responding to it?
It depends.
Yeah, if it's like positive and tagged, you want to boost the person's review. If they've already told you like they want you to interact with the content, then I can see it. But if it's just like at random, that feels kind of like you're taking somebody else's work and like using it for promotion purposes, even though they didn't mean for like you in a professional sense to use that as like a blurb for their book. Basically, that's what it feels like when they're retweeting. Is like it's a blurb now to promote their work.
Yes. Somebody, I didn't see this before when I was giving my gift giving, but it's like speaking to another reader and the author overhears you and interjects themselves into a conversation. So same sort of deal. Like, nobody really invited you here. So like, I don't know, maybe just don't. Let's see. I always address my wrap-ups to readers and never think that an author should watch them. So readers are the intended audience. More support for if you were an author reading your own reviews, but quietly.
You get a friend. Your friend reads it for you.
So Guru Gossip is a safe place for those people to do what they want, and I cannot engage with it. So as an author, I wouldn't look at reviews. Maybe if I were a couple years removed from it, that's also true. Like once it's like far enough away that you're like, nothing I can do about that, then you kind of go back and look. I just would look from a curiosity point. Like I couldn't help myself, basically.
Yeah, same.
All right. Next question for you guys, and then we'll kind of wrap this up and move on to some other things here. Do you think that booktubers and book reviewers should be mindful of when and how they deliver bad reviews for the sake of authors' feelings? Because a lot of this was based on like 2020 was hard and like it's the holidays. Like, so do you guys ever keep any of that in mind in terms of how you deliver bad reviews and when you deliver them?
I think it's important not to make it personal. I mean, again, unless like the author has done something to you, like maybe, but I don't know. I think I do take authors' feelings into account. Like I said, like, you can't be precious about it, but I do feel like at the end of the day, like a human wrote this book. Like it is not meant to be like this utter, beautiful, divine work of creation. It is something that someone made. And I don't think I doubt that any author is going to watch my review, but I do want to talk about it like an actual person was like behind it. And so that means like not like making a personal attack about them, and also like just not being completely dismissive of it unless I feel like it has somehow been made in bad faith.
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like coming at it as like somebody who works in publishing, I do have to take authors' feelings into consideration, because at some point I might be working with them and it would be very awkward if I was like, roasting their book completely. So I tend not to post, just like on a personal level, I tend not to really talk about books that I don't like unless I think there's something problematic about them that I feel needs to be addressed in a like broader context. Like the only book this year I think that I like completely lambasted was Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes because it deserved it. And Suzanne Collins does not care about me, level, employee, whatever. So I feel like it also depends on like the context of the reviewer as well, whether they will take it into consideration, because I do know of people who work in publishing who've gotten in trouble because they posted something on Goodreads and the author saw. So I feel like it is a context sort of question for what you would choose to do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not in publishing, but I am in the book community, and a couple of authors do follow me. And I don't know if they watch my videos, but they might. So if like I'm talking about specific books that I know that the authors might watch the video, I might filter myself a little bit. But in general, if I have something like honest to say, like I did not like this, I will say it. And it's, as the bookie said, it's nothing personal. Like I don't have anything against the author. It's just that I didn't like this aspect of the story. And I also try not to be I think some people, when they're, and I don't think this is wrong, but some people, when they are reviewing books that they don't like, they could be very intense and very like aggressive in their critique. And I often try to avoid that unless I think it's absolutely necessary. Unless the book is absolute like trash, or unless it's like really, really problematic. I generally wouldn't go down that route of really insulting the book or the work, or kind of implying that the author can't write or the author is not good or whatever. So it just really depends on the context, if I know the author and like how I feel about the book, if it's really bad enough for me to go at it.
Yeah, I think that this was something. So I have a website, snarksquad.com, and we recap television and books. And one of the things that we did very early on in like when we created the website was recap 50 Shades of Grey, which is like not only just like a bad quality book, but like problematic on so many different levels. And in a way, usually, we talk about this, about separating the author from the work, but in a way that I was like, this is clearly what this author thinks and like believes, and it's like so bad. So it was very difficult to make those separation. But then like moving on and looking back at that project, Nicole and I, who I think she's still in the chat, one of the things that we like came to realize is, okay, we need to make better boundaries about when we're talking about a work and when we're literally roasting this. That is the point of the website. Like we're roasting the work, but where do we draw the boundaries of like roasting a person? And where are jokes like, this is such a bad book and I hate it, and like E.L. James is like scum of the earth, sort of thing. So like where do we draw those boundaries? Because we realize that like probably we should have them. And like that was like our moment of growth as like reviewers. And I still think about that when I write or give reviews, and I will go ham on a work and your M dashes or whatever the hell that you use in the pages. But I try to be very mindful of what I say about the author as a person, because I'm not here to review them as a person. Somebody's going to mail you a papaya, Deboki.
Oh, no.
I mean,
papaya stands on
if it's a green papaya and it arrives green, I will eat it. Otherwise, it is not coming near me.
It's fair. It's a very weird texture, I will say. I like enjoy the taste of it, but the texture is very strange.
Yeah, it's
weird.
Okay. I feel like we could keep talking about this forever, depending on how long we go. But we're going to go into sort of like the next category of things that happen, and this is all around sort of like racism, the Black Lives Matter sort of movement and protest and everything that happened over the summer, and this general idea of like, we will do better, like the key words. So we have a couple of things that happened this year. First, Jessica Cluess, who is a YA author. So there is an educator named Lorena Germán, who is an advocate for anti-racist education. And so one of the things that she sort of is responsible for is the hashtag disrupt texts, which is this push to disrupt sort of like the classics that are taught in the US and make them basically less white, and to sort of diversify the kinds of classics that we're reading in the classroom. So this author, Cluis, responded to something that Henmang had tweeted with a thread defending progressive, I guess, classics, but it was in an incredibly like aggressive Twitter thread that she not only came to like protect these old dead white men, but also was like attacking Herman personally and like saying stuff like "you're an idiot," "sit on attack and spin," like very, very aggressive things. So she did receive a lot of backlash, like for the thread itself. She issued an apology in which she said she was deeply sorry and that she needed to learn and do better. And then she was dropped by Random House Kids and by her agent. So a whole mess. Then we have Lauren Miracle, who was moderating a panel during the virtual version of YALLFest that was supposed to be like a panel highlighting diversity. And it featured Natasha Diaz, Jennifer De Leon, George M. Johnson, and Angie Thomas. And she was the moderator. She kept talking over the panelists. And during the panel, she said that there needed to be more representation for white boys like her son. And so I guess afterwards she wrote, or like, I don't know if it was an already existing book or she wrote a book about like based on her son's life. And in this book, based on her son's life, not only does she describe her stand-in son's penis, she also described a Black character as Shimmy Shimmy Cocoa Puffs. And then has the main character pull on one of the Black character's braids and say, "Bye, Felicia." That was Shimmy Shimmy Cocoa. There were lots of brand call-outs that happened through the summer, and lots of people asking publishers and brands, you know, what are you going to do better? People making lots of statements. Book Outlet was called out for the underrepresentation in their booktubes and bloggers that they use as sort of for promotion. And their response to this included that they chose people who were, quote, family friendly. So obviously people had an issue with the fact that they couldn't choose a diverse group of individuals who were not family friendly. I did my best to figure out what the heck happened here because I just caught the tail end of this, but Rachel Marie, who was a booktuber who over the years had been called out, I think, for like numerous things or just like, hey, this was not correct or whatnot. And so over the summer, Jesse from Bow Ties and Books hosted on a live. I think it was like a memorial of sorts or something along those lines. And Rachel Marie took screenshots of Jesse and posted it on Twitter with like a really uncomfortable and inappropriate sort of caption. So people were calling Rachel Marie out. Like that was a memorial. Weird thing to do was take screenshots of it. And Rachel Marie sort of apologized, but then also, I don't know, reached her max of like being on Twitter. So just like quit and deleted and yeeted herself from the community. A couple more. Publishing Paid Me happened over the summer as well, where people were trying to get a little bit more transparency in what authors were being paid for advances. And so they were using the hashtag Publishing Paid Me and sharing what their books got in terms of advance. And the real standout moment was that Chip Creek, I think is his name, Chip Creek, shared that he was paid $800,000 for a book called Cape May, which I think like two people that I follow on Twitter and like BookTube even knew what that was. But also people started like reading it and roasting it, and like the general consensus is that it was not worth $800,000, but so it goes. And then I forgot that this even happened this year, but remember, and this was February, Barnes & Noble announced that they were going to re-release classics with the covers, like with the main characters depicted as people of color on the covers of the books. And then people were like, no, and they were like, oops, sorry, and then it never
almost
happened.
seems so quaint now because it's like it was in February. It was a different century.
Yeah.
Man.
When
I
I
was
was
still in the office when that happened because I remembered having conversations at work about that because it was like with, I'm pretty sure, the US branch of our company. So we had to have conversations about that as well.
Everybody in the chat right now saying, "Oh my God, so much happened! What a long freaking year! What a freaking year!" Yes.
Yeah.
my brain cells, I have brain cells that are dying right now after
especially
listening to all of that.
I know. And if we sat here and like thought individually about like all of the like different call outs and things that were happening, all of the conversations that were like happening, lots of people were talking during that time and during the summer about like being creators of color within the like booktube community and existing on Twitter and whatnot. So it was like huge conversations that were happening around that time. And as I was like getting ready, I'm like, what was my even question to you guys about all of this? And the only thing I could come up with is anyone doing better? Are any brands doing better? Like, do we see any delivery or any, I don't know, do you guys see any movement in terms of?
I would like to know what's going on with publishing. Like, Paige, is there like a huge disconnect between publishing and the book community? Because I don't understand how somebody could let Shimmy Cocoa Puffs like pass through a first draft. I don't understand how people could pay $800 for whatever that was, $800,000, more, even $800 for whatever that was. And then the whole, like, let's have 3 different covers of Alice in Wonderland, a book about a white girl with like a black Alice in Wonderland, an Asian Alice in Wonderland, an Indian on the cover, but in the book she's still white. Like, who works in publishing? Who comes up with these ideas? Like,
white people work in publishing, white upper middle class people work in publishing, and they are generally the people who are in charge, who get the say. Everybody who I know, like, that is a person of color, for the most part, is a junior employee, and we don't have any power in the industry right now. There's a couple people I know, like specifically in Canadian publishing, who are people of color in positions of power. But again, if you're one person in a department, you have to pick and choose your battles because you can't, like, people will start ignoring you if you constantly are saying these things. So it's really frustrating. Like, I agree with everything everybody brings up on social media as like the community for like the readers, but also because the industry is so opaque, you don't know half of the shit that's happening behind the scenes that we're struggling with because it's such a white industry. And it's no surprise to anybody who works in publishing that any of this stuff happened this past year and any past year, and it's not changing. There's a lot of conversations happening, but it all feels very theoretical. People who've worked here long, like in the industry longer than me, did not have much hope when the reckoning happened in June. And I see why now, a full like 8 months later, because nothing has really changed. Because it's not really in their interest. They're still making a shit ton of money, and they're able to like appropriate marginalized voices and use them to make more profit for themselves without changing anything.
Yeah.
It's a problem within the industry itself that needs to change fundamentally before anything else can really change. And I don't have a lot of hope, guys. It's great.
I mean, if it's such a headache for like people in the general book community, I can imagine what it's like for y'all who actually have to work in that environment. That's a lot.
Like, even with like the book cover things, I was not surprised when that happened. I was like, of course that happened. That makes complete sense because it was a capitalist move. Because
when I saw it, I was like, okay, because like my thought was, oh, these are retellings. They're doing retellings. And then I saw the bottom. I was like, Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. I'm like, a retelling by who? Like, what's going on? And I was like, wait, so it's the same book, but I think for publishing, I don't know.
And I think that, I mean, there was a lot of big talk in the community as well. So let's say like a BookTube, for instance. I'm telling you that when I am like paying attention to end of year lists this year, and I want to see what the heck is on your end of year list this year, because everybody who said, without even realizing or like without the knowledge, I guess sometimes, of talking about what it even is to read diversely, and like made all of these promises, talked a big talk. I'm looking at your end of year list, and that thing better be, if it's all white, immediate unsubscribe, immediate. Like that, I have to draw boundaries because it really can feel really hopeless. And it's in small communities like ours and larger scale things like publishing as a whole. So guess what? I have to draw my own battle lines here. So it's hard to see how much, if any, the needle has moved, but in like these smaller moments, then we can really tell, like, are you actually backing up what you said you were going to do? And guess what? You don't have to read diversely. You don't have to, but if you don't, then you're not the person for me to watch, and I'm going to move on, basically.
And if you don't like, be performative about it, right?
Exactly.
And like when the whole Rachel Marie thing happened, right? Like as very interesting as a character Rachel Marie was, I think in many ways she's kind of like an extreme example of a type of behavior that I see from a lot of white people in the book community, which was, I think what was her real downfall is that she was trying really hard to be seen as progressive and as an ally and as woke, but because she wasn't actually invested in being those things and more so invested in being perceived as that, she didn't really know what the hell she was doing, which is why every time she said or did something, it was, short-sighted or inappropriate. And I often see that from a lot of, like, especially white people in the book community. It's a lot of this kind of performative, like, allyship and performative activism that's very hollow. And you could just tell that people just want to be perceived a certain way, or they use certain buzzwords like the "I will do better" or "I will educate myself." If I hear another white person in the book community talk about how they're going to educate themselves, I can't. So it's like there is this kind of like performative sort of behavior that I see from specifically, maybe from other people too, but especially like white people in the book community, to kind of be perceived as progressive and woke when it's like, you're just being cringy. Shut up.
Yeah.
And I feel like part of it too is like, in Canada specifically, the kind of racism is also, it's sort of the same thing where they quietly want to be perceived as more progressive. They're always like, we're better than the US. But the quiet kind of racism, the insidious kind of microaggressions are often like worse because they're gaslighting you, telling you we're so progressive. But actually everything they're doing is actually systemic racism or like just in general horrible thing. Like it's definitely double that in Canada for the specific publishing industry, I find. Because in the US,
the cherry on top.
Yeah, it's just like a frustrating, you navigate it differently than you would an overt like racist.
Yeah, I think like if your discussion of racism is centering like you as the white person in the conversation, like you got to keep it in your journal, like keep it in your diary, work it out. Like I think it's good to have that conversation with yourself, but I think it should be like a private one. I don't think you're doing much good by making it a part of your public persona and like part of your public progress. Like that's for me really what the line is like, where are you centering yourself in this conversation?
Mm-hmm.
And I think like another thing that I was thinking about this and how it connects to some of the stuff in the previous conversation, a line that I've seen come up in the context of like people leaving negative reviews of books, and particularly reviewers of color leaving negative reviews of authors of color's books. Like I think this came up with Fadwa in their review, where like the author will like respond defensively and then their follow-up is like, you need to support us because we're authors of color. And like, I understand that like you are in a tough position, you're in a tough industry. I have like a lot of sympathy, empathy for that situation. But the way that this like becomes a burden on the reviewers of color, like and limits what their honesty is, especially when the underlying issue is like, yes, there is a problem with readers, but there's also like Paige was saying, like this huge institutional problem. Like that is like the core of what is actually going on. And so like this expectation that's being placed on the reviewers of color to like review books in a certain way and like to act as like PR people when like that is not our function. Like that is like where these things become even more mixed up. And it's like a weird part of being a reviewer on BookTube that like you don't have to think about always when you're like coming from a different background. And that I find like really fraught in these conversations.
Yeah. I think it is sort of cyclical in this way. Part of what has bothered me throughout this whole thing, the conversations and sort of where we are now, is the like tokenization of a lot of different things that has happened. And one of the things that I've noticed is that, you know, there was a lot of talk about supporting creators of color, as like, let's say in the booktube community. But what ended up happening is that like 2 or 3 people got a boost, or you know, like we saw 2 or 3 channels grow very rapidly, and there's like such a wealth of, you know, different channels and people from different backgrounds, and it's like, okay, this is what this is what white people do all the time, is they pick like the token 2 or 3 things, and then they give that attention, and they're like, we did it, which is why you hear the same 2 or 3 books by authors of color like being discussed over and over and over again, because it is the least amount of effort to do what everybody else is already doing, to do the least amount of research, and then to say, okay, I did it. So it almost falls back on the reviewers of color to then do like the majority of this work of like finding these books, reviewing these books, promoting these books. But it is also not our job. We're like, not only are we not getting paid for it, but we're still just reviewers, and we can have like different opinions on these books, and we'll like some and not like others. And not every book with a Latinx main character like can I even talk about in depth, because I'm Dominican. So like my experience is like so limited as well, but we end up having to do so much of this work because of like the systemic stuff that is happening, but also like this tokenization of like, I follow the 2 biggest Black booktubers, and I read the 3 Black books that end up on the New York Times bestseller list, and I did my job. So, you know, for an example, because there's a bunch of different types of diversity that we can talk about. But so, yes, it just like, it keeps feeding itself in like sort of a sick cycle.
Yeah, it reminds me of the story that like just recently came out on Twitter, probably a couple weeks ago by this point, where people were talking about like the acquiring process for Angie Thomas's The Hate U Give at SNS specifically, and how they were like, we already have Jason Reynolds, why do we need this other book as well? And I feel like it just trickles down, is always the same, like, because we have a couple books and those books get so much attention, or those people get so much attention, it gives the false like idea that everything's fixed because these people are like now bigger, now more famous, now get more like voices. Like it's, and then you don't see the other people who are still struggling like behind these bigger voices.
Yeah. I felt
it's like an image thing. You go ahead, Debuki.
Oh, sorry. I was thinking about that with the publishing paid me thing, because I think that conversation happened around when the Bon Appetit channel was kind of falling apart. And like that's more like I work in video stuff, and so like a lot of the stuff that was going on there, like Paige, you were saying, like, yeah, I was not surprised like for me seeing a lot of the stuff with Bon Appetit, like connecting it to stuff that I've seen like at like magazines like that, where it's like, yeah, that is like exactly what I would expect from a New York outlet, like to barely pay their people and to have it like all boil down to like, you know, a few people who have to speak out. It's like that publishing paid me story, like the $800,000. Part of me is kind of like, God, man, like how could you even say that? But then part of me is like, well, I'm glad you did. I mean, I guess thank you for putting it out there. Like,
yeah, people were coming for him in his bad book, and he was like trying to help. I mean, he benefited from being a white male, I guess, and like a system built to benefit him. And he's like, I guess I'll be transparent. And everybody was like, skirt, say what?
Well, I mean, he got 800K US, so I ain't like too sad for him, but like
no. He can dry his tears with his money.
But like he also was like one of the few authors who probably had that kind of advance that came forward for that was like another situation where people were like, they're going to continue to benefit if they don't say anything, so why would they, unless they want things to change. So that was interesting to see too.
So catching up on comments here, Book of the Month was called out for not selecting more diverse reads. And while I didn't notice a concern before, I think they've made a substantial change. That's just my view. I agree with this. I was a Book of the Month subscriber before. And when they got called out, it was a little bit like, okay, I see it. But also because they like, typically choose like the book that is from an author that is from a diverse background. So I didn't really notice it, but I have noticed in recent months they are doing there is more of an effort to diversify the selection that they're providing. So Book of the Month, I think, is a company that has at least done something like some sort of visible change. I haven't heard anything about Book Outlet, honestly. I hadn't shopped at Book Outlet in years anyway, so I was just like, whatever.
I never did.
I did like one haul randomly at the beginning of the pandemic, and then they did that, and I was like, well, fuck. And then I immediately, in that video comment, I pinned it being like, they're shitty, don't buy from them.
It's they're still listening and learning. That's where we are.
Hiring and paying. That's what you need to do.
I'm saying. Oh my gosh, I could go off on tangents on like from your friendly neighborhood HR lady about like the business side of all of this as well, but we'll keep it to books as well. Sajid yelling about shimmy shimmy Cocoa Puffs, like honestly.
But like, it's so ridiculous. How could that get published in a book? It just like, how could somebody like it sounds funny on the surface of it, and it is, but like, how could like an editor and whoever else is like, looking through the book, read that and think, oh yeah, this is good to publish.
Mm-hmm.
It's mind-boggling. And the fact that she unironically talked about white boy representation when John Green, exists, it makes no sense to me.
I mean, well, this is another thing too that I saw recently, and I wish I had thought about it to like get the link, but I'll try and find it and put it in the description. But just the idea of like the mid list, I guess is what they call it. So like the bulk of what publishing is white. And so we talk about like bestsellers and like the handful of titles that we talk about collectively as a community, but all of the books like in this mid list that we don't often hear about is so overwhelmingly white that just because we get like, again, these token few books from diverse authors that we're talking about and that are more visible, it has not addressed sort of like the iceberg sort of thing that we're encountering, is that like the majority of it is underwater and that majority of it is white. So go forth, Lauren Miracle. Your representation is out there.
That's the thing I always feel too when I do like have a negative review of a book by an author of color, where I'm in some ways kind of like happy because I'm like all I want is for us to be able to be mediocre. Like that is what I want. And so I'm kind of like, yes, do it. Like be bad. Like I don't have to like this book. I am so happy.
It's just the whole like you have to work twice as hard to just get like half as far as somebody who's white. Like white authors tend to get more chances as a mid-list author of publishing more books versus a person of color working in publishing. And that's something that just needs to be addressed in general in order for us to be able to be mediocre.
Yeah. That's our wish for you, authors of color, is for you to just be aggressively fine. That's all I want for you.
It's so bad that people don't have the opportunity or the privilege of being mediocre. Like, we hear like,
give me $800,000 for a book that no one is ever gonna know about. Like no one's gonna know about it until I tweet about it, and everyone's like, "Why?" Like that is.
So Jocelyn makes a good point about how we're finding more accountability in terms of authors, but agents and editors' names aren't remembered to the same degree, and they're the ones pushing those same books through. So again, systemic, and this is why it's so insidious and why it kind of feels very hopeless and helpless, especially when we're talking about sort of the things that have to happen foundationally, like hire me, pay me, sort of at that bottom level to get like publishing as a whole sort of looking like the world around us, and it's not happening. So how much change can we really cycle through? So
yeah, and you often see like some of the books that we all talk about in the community, I've noticed certain imprints are the imprints that publish these books, which obviously are by like certain editors. And it's very interesting when you like make that connection, like, oh, I know what this book is going to be like.
I would love like a top editors video or like a guide to the, I assume you can't make a warning.
Somebody should do a deep dive into who's editing the books that we talk about a lot.
Yeah, get editors on the map 2021. Like, let's do it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Trying to catch up here. Yep, same thing. White people make so many of these decisions. So
It's so frustrating. And even when you get the chance to tell them something, they often think they know better because they've been working in the industry longer than you. So you tend not to be heard when you raise issues.
A lot of people in the comments are agreeing that Black Lives Matter support was just a front to appear to people, but very few corporations are trying to be better.
I can't speak too much for like companies and the publishing industry and stuff, but just like on a community level, I think like I've just gotten to the point where it's like I can't really depend on like the average white person anymore to do anything. Like, and that's why I really appreciate like people within the book community kind of creating their own spaces and kind of creating spaces that are welcoming and are inclusive for like authors, as opposed to expecting it from the wider community, like BookNet Fest or even Bashment Book Club, right? And Rebel Women Lit had their Caribbean Readers Award because when people were doing some kind of, I don't know what it was, but some kind of book awards, and people were complaining about the diversity.
Ethic reads.
Right. And
Yes,
people were
yes.
complaining about the diversity. And I think people were also pointing out that, nobody even talks about the fact that there are like Caribbean reviewers, both diasporic and from the region in this community. And nobody talks about like the fact that we are reading these books, we are putting them out there, we are the ones talking about them. And Caribbean Bookstagram has grown so much just within a year. So that's why I like how Rebel Woman was like, you know what, fuck y'all. We're just going to make we own awards for Caribbean people only by. And I just love, as I said, I can't really speak much for publishing because that's a lot more systematic and there's not a lot of room to play there. But like, at least within the community, I really appreciate when people are just like, you know what, whatever, we're going to do our own thing. We're going to create our own spaces. I like that.
This is something that drives me up the wall. Literally, like something that I've been trying to formulate how to talk about it in a way that comes across in the spirit and with the energy that I want to give off. But obviously, Sam and I put together BookNet Fest, right? A small event, which our whole thing was that we wanted to be able to see and hear from a diverse array of people, because we were going to these events that were all primarily white and the same panelists over and over again. And we were like, we don't want this. I think something that this community is really, really bad at is not supporting things where they exist. People would rather sit here and yell at Sarah J. Maas to put diversity into her books. Sarah J. Maas is never going to do it. And if she does, it is not going to be done well. Go seek the fantasy that already exists by authors of color and support that. You're wasting your breath trying to get like the white author to do this thing. And again, over the summer, like trying to get like support for things like a BookNet Fest or like a small run like book club. It's really, really a lot of work. And so to see like especially white creators come out of the woodwork, suddenly be woke, like all of a sudden you're woke and you're like, well, okay, now I'll start it myself. And it's just like we've been here doing this work. And now like your event, online event that you want to do, or your readathon that you want to do, or your book club that you want to do is 10 times the size of mine. Instead of just supporting the thing that already exists from the creators from whence we are trying to support and these conversations are coming from, you're just going to go do and start your own thing. And it literally, obviously, as you can tell, like very like, getting worked up about it, but it drives me up a wall. This community sucks at that.
It does.
Yeah, every time like the diversity conversation comes up, like someone always like in good faith, but like I'm at my kind of the end of like my ability to accept this in good faith, will say something like, like BookTube is all white or something like that. And I'm always just like, it's not. Like, it looks like it's all white to you. There's a reason for that. And like, we can talk about what the demographics of BookTube are, but like, it's not.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. I think we can move on for this one.
But also, BookNet Fest is amazing, and
it is. It's really good.
That was like an indirect plug for my event, but honestly, like it just gets so frustrating because obviously, like you put so much work into something, and so just like not be able to drum up enough support for it is like really frustrating. And then to see somebody come at, like I said, out of the woodwork, and just because they have like a certain amount of privilege already, like benefit from like, oh, I'll just start it because nobody's doing it. Like, people are doing it. You just decided to pay attention right now, and by not paying attention, you've now harmed the people who were doing it all along even more. So
and it falls into whole like the white savior complex for like specifically like those issues with BIPOC people, where they think like because they're privileged, they need to use their privilege to help us when we've already been doing everything. It happens in publishing too, with like communities who create like resources for people who want to work in the industry. And this past year, it happened where like a white person who was just doing internships decided to start their own like young publishing group, saying like, I'm doing this for the marginalized people, when we've already like for years been doing it ourselves.
Okay, for real. Moving on. I put this under the heading questionable choices were made. I don't know what else to call it, but Mackenzie Lee over the summer was working, I think, for or at a small bookstore. And in a bid to drum up some sales, Lee started doodling in and signing other authors' work, including lots of authors of color. I found specifically that in a book about child soldiers, Mackenzie doodled "So girls much war," signed it, and sent it off to a reader.
So quirky.
Quirky, yeah. Paige and I have a whole live show about this, but Sasha Alsberg selling ARCs on Depop, allegedly forging signatures in some of these books that she was selling on Depop, but also just breaking quarantine repeatedly throughout the year and putting it on blast in social media. So, that's how we know, like, you're not just breaking quarantine quietly, like you're doing it on social media. And when Sasha was called out for this, she took a social media break, but is still posting on social media. The break like never happened. I think at this very moment, Sasha Alsberg is like breaking tier 4 lockdown in London. So, not I know because my group chat told me she muted me on Instagram. I can't see it myself. The reading rush. And so the reading rush had a few things happened when they did their challenges. There were some challenges that were like quarantine insensitive, like go read a book outside, and everybody's like, we're supposed to be staying inside. They're always called out for their sort of ableist challenges, like dictating how people read physically, which is always kind of an issue for readers. And then the selection of a book about performative activism that they didn't read. So choices were made. There was a books and lingerie trend that went around. So people taking pictures of like books, but in lingerie, and people were posing with YA books. So it became then like an issue. And then in sort of the same thing, Hannah Witten made a book or a video called Books That Make Me Horny. And it was a list that included YA books as well. So they addressed sort of that whole thing. They decided to keep the video up though, and said, what makes you horny is what makes you horny. So it was kind of like the gist of the response to that. It was like a very involved response. So if you want to see everything that Hannah Witten had to say about it, that is up. So I've got a few questions. Taking all of this into consideration, are there boundaries for us as adults when we are reading and discussing YA? How do you guys feel about like putting things on lists like Books That Make Me Horny, and it's a book that features like an underage protagonist, or posing like in lingerie, or things that are like suggestive but like involving YA? Do you even have thoughts about this? Like, it wasn't something that I like had thought to think about until I saw this, and I was like, like, what are the boundaries here?
Here's the thing, right? So I started watching the Horny Books video, and the first part of it actually started out interesting because the person who made the video, she seems to be somewhat of correct me if I'm wrong, but she seems to be somewhat of an expert when it comes to like sex and health or something.
A lot of her content, is that.
So she was talking about genital concordance, which is where in your mind you're not really okay with the idea of experiencing something sexually, but if you see it in a movie or if you read it in a book, like your body might be aroused by it, and it's kind of like a disconnect between your mind and like your physical body. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. I could understand like where you're coming from. But then she started to list out the books. And with some of the books, it's like, okay, like you read an erotica and it made you horny. Okay, fine. Okay. But then she said Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda and Gentleman's Guide and Aryan Dancing. I'm like, these are teenagers. And like, these are people who are like 15 and 16. And sometimes I'm just like, if you experience something in the privacy of your house and it's questionable, like, that's valid, but you don't have to put everything out on the internet. You can make a video and talk about genital concordance and what that is and how people experience it, and maybe talk about the few adult books where you experience it, but you don't really need to like talk about the more questionable experiences that you had with it, if that makes sense. I don't know if what I'm saying is understandable. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel I feel like that's happening a lot across like media. Like I think of like Euphoria and Tiny Pretty Things, which just happened, where I, as like a 26-year-old, was like, I know these people are adults that are playing these characters, but they're playing 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds. Why are they butt-ass naked having full-on sex on my screen? And I feel like because of the way we are sort of making the YA genre, it feels more like new adult now. When you think of like S.J. Maas with like her whatever Akatar series, and like the way publishing doesn't feel comfortable creating a new separate genre, that we're getting these more adult themes, these more explicit scenes. And it's like, I'm not the one to say teens should be reading this explicit stuff. I don't know. Like when I was a teenager, I was reading full on adult sex scenes in vampire books or whatever. But it's sort of like, what are you marketing it as well? Like that is a whole thing that I've been trying to like figure out for myself, as like when I was watching Tiny Pretty Things specifically, and how we're sexualizing teenagers in certain content.
Yeah, but there's a huge difference between like a Court of Thorns and this and that, like that series, versus like Simon versus, like that is considerably a lot younger in the way that it's written and stuff like that. So the fact that she would also point that out as a book that made her horny is just questionable,
Something about like having it be high school versus like teenagers in ambiguous fantasy setting. Like Six of Crows, to me, like those characters never have read like teenage, and I know other people have had the same experience. We're just like not even thinking about anything smut related, just like on a visceral level. To me, those characters read older, and so in my head they are like in their 20s, even if on the page they are a teenager. And I know that is not what the book intends, but that is just the way that I read them. But then like when you have characters in high school, like to me Riverdale is a show set in a really weird college. Like I just cannot treat those characters teenagers, because I'm just like, this makes no sense to me. But that is like a weirdness of like how we show teenagers now, where like we really like school settings because they like force everyone to be together, but also they make no sense. Like everyone, like no one's parents are around, like no one has any supervision, no one has any homework. Like I don't know why that's the thing I'm always hung up on, but like no one has homework and they still go to Harvard. Like
put them in college. Put them in college, and it's everything.
I think that there's almost like a separate conversation about the role of sex in YA and how you land on how YA or how sex should be depicted in YA. And I'm not somebody who's going to say like, no sex in YA ever, because it's like a reality. It's like a fact of life. So like, this is something that needs to be addressed. It's fine. However, I think that as reviewers, it comes back to what Sajid was saying, like, okay, now I have to think about not only what I took in and how I experienced it, what am I going to say about it online? Because now these are the things that I have to think about for myself. I am an adult woman. So what am I going to say? These are fictional characters, but they are teenage fictional characters. So I think that there is a little bit of consideration about like how I talk about these things, because to me, it isn't like the single fact of one person was turned on by Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda, but like broader conversations about like media and the sexualization of children and sort of the social construct that we have in place, that, there are boundaries. And if you are a minor, like these are the social contracts that we have in place, and there's a certain amount of protection that we afford children. And I think that, I don't know, it's just something that I like to continue to participate in and not talk about children in a way that I don't think that they should be talked about, whether fictional or not, because these are the things that bleed into real life. You know what I mean? So I don't know. It's just weird. I don't read a ton of YA, so I'm like not often involved in conversations like this, but I saw these two things and I was like, oh no.
Yeah, it was, especially with the Sema versus the Homo sapiens agenda. When that was mentioned, I was so confused because nothing about that book felt particularly
sexual. Yeah,
that was not the purpose of the story. Like, especially because I read earlier this year The Best Laid Plans by Cameron Lund, which is literally all about the character losing their virginity. And I would never speak about the book saying like it's steamy and stuff, even though there's sex scenes, because that wasn't the point of the story. That wasn't like, it wasn't supposed to titillate me, basically.
Yeah.
All right, another question for you guys. Has pandemic or quarantine changed how you view any creators because of their behavior during this time? Like outside of Sasha breaking quarantine, have you seen other creators? Maybe, I mean, probably yes, in the larger like other communities that you follow, because I know that there's tons of influencers like living their lives. But have you seen anything in the book community, and in general, has it changed how you view anybody that you used to follow or engage with?
I don't really follow like people who would do those things. I don't really follow the Sasha Alsbergs of the book community, if that makes sense. So I haven't really encountered anybody who I follow that, you know, really did something off this year when it comes to like breaking quarantine.
Yeah, I feel like that's a good point that we made in our lives. Like, I generally wasn't following the people who've recently returned. I've been seeing people flood back in with their I'm back videos and like content. It's been interesting to see like who has even addressed anything like about the reason that they left. I feel like generally people haven't been doing that. And so like I've completely just like cut ties, don't even bother like curiously watching a video here and there, because I just feel like at this point I should do my part by just not showing support in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't think of anyone.
Yeah, me neither.
Like a general anxiety. Like I think in weirdly more, it's gotten me to like it's more communities where there's a lot of like anxiety. That's the stuff I've had to disengage from, because it like starts to interfere with like my ability, like just as someone who is like super anxiety prone, like it starts to interfere with like my ability to like actually think through what is a good decision for me and like what is a responsible decision. So like in communities where people are almost like kind of martyring themselves around like just how many precautions they've taken, like that for me, I can't, like I have to be able to like think, and I have to be able to do it in a way that like isn't terrifying, which is like it's not as egregious as like going across the ocean in the middle of a pandemic and like violating curfew, but like it's really easy for me to like again, like I was also like similarly was not following Sasha, so I like didn't even really know that was happening. So like for me, it's been more the stuff where figuring out how to manage all the other parts of my internet consumption that I think has been more affected.
Yeah, I think Sasha was really the only one. The places where I have been seeing like quarantine questionable behaviors, like the high school people I still follow like on social media, or like random family who think everything is fake news sort of thing. So like that's mostly where I've been like, oh my gosh, stay at home, what are you doing? But I don't follow like influencers in a way that, you know, I'm seeing them still jet setting around the world. I was following Sasha just because we met previously like at different events and things, so I saw that kind of happening real time, but I think that was the only one. For the most part, we've all just been in misery together. So
we only follow cool people.
Someone did bring up the community, and I do think there's like a lot, like in the like when you go on like when you see people like just filming makeup tutorials together, you're like, you don't need to, like, why? And like especially since a lot of them are based in LA, and like LA is LA right now, like I'm just kind of like.
Yeah, TikTok too. I'll occasionally get like one of the like big TikTokers, like the teens and stuff, and they'll be like, "At the house, we all share together," and I'm like, "Why? Like, why are you there right now?" So, yeah, I saw some of that.
Yeah, I feel like it was like
okay. One more question about this. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it was like June when I started seeing people start doing collabs again, because there was a brief period where like you were not seen with people, and not everybody's like, I'm getting like rapid tested and that kind of stuff as well. But yeah, I feel like if you have a following, just be responsible with what you're promoting online in terms of like the lifestyle right now currently with COVID happening.
Yeah.
All right, so again, about these like sort of choices were made, we saw kind of varied responses to all of these sort of faux pas in terms of apologies or breaks from social media or whatever else happened. How do you think when it's something like this that people should deal? And I know we talked a little bit about it, Paige, but like in terms of apologies or quitting Twitter or social media breaks, like what do you personally like to see from a creator who has done something that is like something like this, where you're just like the choices you made were bad? Like what is the punishment that fits the crime? What is the apology that fits the crime?
I just want them to address it. To be like, the main thing for me is I don't want them to sweep it under the rug because enough time has passed. That's the most frustrating thing. If they say they're gonna learn, they're gonna listen, I want to see what they've done with the couple like of months or whatever that they've had off. I feel like that's the most concrete way to see somebody's improving or changing. In some cases, losing their platform, I'm like, I don't know. If they don't change, they should effectively not be supported, because they're going to continue to promote negative things and just keep thinking they can bounce back. If nothing continues to happen, they'll just be like, well, it didn't affect me this time, so I'll ignore it this time. And then in 2 weeks, I can post again. So like, that's the frustrating element. It's like, they're not held accountable in any way.
Yeah.
I think I really need to see like what you're doing to kind of like curb whatever the problem was in the first place. So if it is that, you were called out because you were going outside during the pandemic and whatnot, like, what are you doing? What is your changed behavior? Like staying inside? How are you helping other people? How are you using your platform? Like, that's the thing for me. Like, another example is, I know that Chandler from Chandler Ainsley she came off of her platform recently, and I saw that she recently uploaded a video, and she said, one of the things she said is that she's going to try to read more diversely and to read more authors of color and whatnot. And there were a bunch of different things she was addressing, but that's just one thing as an example that I'm pointing out. And like, I'm like, okay, but I need to see that. So I'm not saying that I'm going to watch all of her videos, because I don't really watch her videos that often, but like, if it is that the next 4, 5, 6 videos she posts, you actually see that change, you actually see her responding to that critique, that's the thing for me. Like, I want to see you actually respond to the criticisms that you got. And not everybody needs to be deplatformed or canceled or anything like that. All you have to do is really kind of acknowledge where you went wrong, be vulnerable and engage with people properly, and not just like block people or argue with people or be defensive. If you think you're going to do that, take a step back, take a breather, maybe DM a couple friends and ask for their opinions. Like, talk to people and like really understand where they're coming from before you like make rash decisions. Like, that's what I want to see. I think the problem is that people get very defensive, and they don't really want to see like where they went wrong. They don't want to like have conversations with people and talk to people, and that could be difficult, but like, you have to kind of make that effort to do that, and then actually show people that you're changing through your behavior and through your decisions. In some cases, maybe you need to deplatform and just delete everything like Rachel Marie did. Like, because I think she was an example of, she did something and she got called out, and she apologized, and she did something, she got called out, and it's like to the point where it's like there's no going back. What is it, the pin or the hair that broke the camel's back or something like that? Like, you can't fix back the camel back. It don't break, just delete your Twitter and go away. So different punishments for different crimes, but like, for the people who don't deserve to be deplatformed, I just want to see changed behavior. I want to see transparency, vulnerability, and the ability to like, listen to people and understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times where people go wrong is kind of related to what Sajid was saying earlier, where like people's first instinct is to want to show like how progressive they are. Like I think the same thing happens when they're called out for something, where they're first, like a lot of times people's defensiveness is really rooted in being like having this idea of themselves challenged, where they think that they're so progressive and they think that they're so not racist or they're so unproblematic that suddenly having people be like, actually, this thing you're doing is problematic. They're like, but it can't be because I'm not problematic. And like, that is not how that works. Right. And so I think it's hard because I don't know that I can ever like pinpoint exactly like the specifics. Cause I think like everything Sajid said is like completely accurate. Like I want to see people be vulnerable and I want to see people be like proactive and change their behavior. But what that's going to look like in action is going to be so dependent on the person and going to be so dependent on like whether or not they actually take it seriously. And for some people, it's going to be a longer process. Like it's going to be like, you know, maybe 2-3 years down the road. I'm like, okay, I think I kind of trust them now. Like I feel like they have taken in what happened and like have adjusted their behavior. But like you're gonna also kind of have to accept that there are people who aren't going to make that choice, who aren't going to see you in the same way. Like if 2-3 years down the road you think you've changed and someone else doesn't think you have, or they're still not trusting you, like that's a function of the mistake you made.
Yeah. And I think I have an issue sometimes with this like sort of taking a break from social media. I think that I don't want these people to be like responding to every tweet that they get. Like there's a level where you can over engage in a time where the conversation kind of sometimes morphs and takes on like a bigger, like, let's talk about things in general in the community that you don't necessarily need to be engaging in. But I think so many times people just take a break from social media, basically quit Twitter because they don't want to hear it anymore. And they continue active on other like, you know, places where the thing didn't happen. So what they're really doing is just choosing not to listen to the people who are calling them out and kind of removing them from themselves in that way. I haven't watched Chandler's video. I saw people were saying that Chandler's back. I think that for me, if in that video she's saying, well, something I want to do is read more diversely, you've been gone. You were on a social media break. What was that break for if you haven't already? You should have come back with the list of books that you read that were from diverse authors. What were you doing? What was the social media? What were you doing? What listening and learning were you doing during that time if it wasn't this work already? Now you're going to come back and promise us to do this work? No, that work should have been done. It should have been started. Like that's the thing that like frustrates me with social media breaks is that I don't feel like they're serving anything. What they're really doing is silencing. And I understand the need to create boundaries. And I cannot imagine being in that situation, especially as somebody, I you know, with anxiety, I probably would be a freaking mess if and when I mess up. Like I know that I will be, and I will need to set boundaries for my own personal health. But I think there's a difference between doing that and then just completely removing yourself from the conversation so you don't have to hear it. So the social media break thing is always one where when I see people end an apology with, and I will be taking a break, I'm like, stop, why?
Yeah, because it shows like they're centering themselves versus the people who were harmed by what they've done. They're more focused on making sure like they, like you do, like you said, have to protect yourself when things happen. You have to step away sometimes, but also, like you said, not silencing the conversation completely. Even if you don't reply, still read those things and consider them and consider how you can change based on what people are telling you.
Correct. All right. I'm going to ask, I've been trying to keep up with comments, but you guys have been on a roll in the chat as well. So if you guys have any specific questions of things that we, or you know, you had asked before that we didn't get to, or anything that we have discussed that we didn't get, that you have a question about, please let me know down in the chat. I'm like looking at the comments now. And we'll just kind of, we've been on an hour and a half, so I want to start to get to wrapping up. There were a couple of other things that I had like jotted down about like discourse that had happened. That was like my fourth category of like discourse. We don't necessarily have to talk about them all. If there's something that you feel, wait, hold on. There is one I want to talk about. This group here, we had a whole chat about consumerism because it has been like an ongoing conversation like all year. I feel like it keeps coming back up about consumerism. And, you know, I think because this has been such a big deal, like about our spending habits in pandemic and all of that, it just has become like a big thing. We did the whole chat, so I'm not going to take you guys through this again. But after we did that chat, it came back around. Like the whole conversation came back around, and it kind of got mixed up in some, like there were people, booktubers, who were trying to raise funds for the Philippines after a natural disaster. And I think some like wires got crossed in the conversation where people were making points about like consumerism within the community. And in this time where they were trying to get people to donate, and like some of the backlash that always, or some of the conversation that always comes up is like, basically, in a nutshell, it's my money. I can do what I want. It's not my fault you can't afford books. But these people who were saying these things didn't know that we were talking about fundraising for the Philippines. So what it came across as, from what I saw, maybe it was intentional, but from what I saw, it was like people were saying like, we need to raise money. And people were saying like, don't blame me, you're too poor to buy books. And so it looked real bad. It looked really, really bad. And it just caused us to kind of rehash this entire idea of like, I can do whatever I want with my money. So I guess I just will ask you, is there anything else about this consumerism? Did you see this happen again? Did you see the conversation come back up again? And is there anything you'd like to add about this whole thing?
I haven't been buying books for the past ever since we had that live show. I actually haven't been buying books like at all. I maybe bought like 3 or 4 books. That's it. So that's the only thing I have to say.
Yeah, it was a very messy. I saw some of it happening like live on the Twitter feed, and it was just like really messy in the sense that because people were so primed from the discussion that had happened earlier in the year that like they misinterpreted everything that was happening in the discussion.
Yes.
And I definitely understood the people who were trying to fundraise their frustrations, because often as a community, we do focus on the Western problems and issues. And they did make points, like when the Black Lives Matter movement was like happening in June, we all rallied together for support. And it would be frustrating to see like this thing is happening in my country, but because my country is in the US, nobody cares. So I totally understood their frustrations as well. And I felt bad for them that the conversation got dismantled because people were so focused on internally being like, it's the consumerism discussion again.
Yes.
It was very frustrating to see that, especially because we literally just discussed it. Why would we be discussing it again like 2 months later?
Yeah, I think that there is like that. We've talked a little bit. I don't remember when, about like the defensiveness that can kind of crop up. So I think people just saw consumerism, and it was the immediate defensiveness of like, I can do whatever I want, and we were like, we weren't even talking about that. Like,
I think like this is like a weird underlying refrain that I feel like is kind of relevant to various different points of this like this whole thing of like just like. The fun of being like really like, I don't know, trying to think of the right word. I don't know, very upfront about like how you feel about a thing. If you're an author responding negatively to a review, like Twitter like does really well with like responding very assertively to things. And I think sometimes like in that case, like an author case, like they're like, you know, if I respond super defensively, like people are going to be like on my side because like we think that like responding in that way is like cool, because it like that is a thing that does well on Twitter. But then inevitably like you got to like figure out when that's actually the right way to talk. And so sometimes like if your first instinct is to jump to that, like this is a case where like maybe like it would have been good to step back and realize like actually there's a different conversation happening. And I'm not saying that to say that I think that that way of talking is bad, because I think there's times when it's appropriate, times when it's funny, like there are places for it. But kind of defaulting to it in a certain situation can like muddy up the conversation.
Yeah, I agree.
And Riley made a good point in the chat, because I'm like sort of trying to read it, about how for consumerism discussions, people take it as a personal attack about their habits, instead of like seeing like, yes, I'm privileged because I can do these things. And like, yes, it is your money, spend it how you want, but also you can't ignore the fact that it does impact your community and your audience and the people who follow you as well. Like, I thought that was a really good point.
Yes. All right, we're getting some questions. So this is how we'll wrap up. What do you think about never reading the work again about an author that has been canceled, has done problematic-ish? J.K. Rowling happened a lot this year. Right? Like that was
from the end of 2019 onward, it was,
I kind of like remembered that, and then I was like, no, like I like no. But this is a good question in terms of like, okay, I've got J.K. Rowling books, or I had on my shelf. I actually still have the Robert Galbraith ones over there. what do we do with this? Like, are you ever going to read Harry Potter again? You know, and that's a specific kind of question because that's who I thought it was, J.K. Rowling, but it might be another author. So what do you think?
Like, it depends. I feel like it depends on the author. And like, again, the context of where you're coming from personally and what you, like, we all have different tolerance levels for things. So, and we all like approach things from a different review perspective as well. Cause sometimes like I'm currently in the middle of binging the Bridgerton novels through my library because I don't want to give money to the author, because the author has said some really stupid things about how they don't write people of color because they want to write happily ever afters. So why am I consuming this content? It's like I'm consuming it through that lens to see like the tropes and stuff. So it depends on like why you're consuming the content. If you're doing it blindly without considering or discussing all the problems related to the content, because like the show itself is also problematic and a lot of people like it. So I feel like it's a context thing. Like Harry Potter, probably won't reread it because she's done so much stuff that completely just infuriates me to the point where it has affected the books. I can't read them again. But like with Bridgerton, I've never read those books. So I'm consuming it as a critical like eye versus nostalgia.
Yeah, Harry Potter is weird too because in some ways it is like so much bigger than J.K. Rowling, but in some ways it is also so like I think was it Vulture did this really great like article kind of describing the level of control that she has tried to have like over Harry Potter even after like its publication, like just with all of the other stuff she's put out. And I think it's like it's going to be a really complicated thing for a lot of people, and it's also not going to be super complicated. Like that's a very wishy-washy answer, but I think like I feel very like I am thinking it through. Like for sure, I don't feel any need to like talk about Harry Potter as like, let me give Harry Potter some free promo kind of thing. But like, it's in terms of just like how I think of the books overall, like because they were such a big part of my childhood, but also like she's done such a good job of ruining any like affection or like gratitude I have towards her for like making those books. It's like. And also because it's affected the way that I read the books themselves, where you're like, oh, right, these books are so fucking problematic. Like, all of this, like, stuff, like, you can see it in the books. Like, that kind of thing is,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, sorry,
No,
I just think like for me with the J.K. Rowling thing, it's a little bit easier. Like I didn't really grow up on Harry Potter. I read it as like when I was in my late teens and early 20s, and so I don't have that kind of nostalgic attachment to say that I need to reread the series anytime soon. I still have the books for now, but I wouldn't be surprised if I get rid of them eventually. But I understand how for some people the books are completely separate from the author and they might want to continue reading them. And it's like we were saying before, like, you know, not everything has to go on social media. Not everything you have to address publicly. So maybe a year or two from now when, you know, you're not really thinking about this as much, you might want to read the Harry Potter series. You might want to get a reread because that's what you feel like doing. You don't have to like wrap it up or talk about it, or, you know, you don't have to make that public because at this point, you know, J.K. Rowling it's not like if you're reading a book by an author who's been dead for 50 years, right? J.K. Rowling is still benefiting every time you promote her work, right? It mightn't seem like your promotion as an individual is significant, but it is in the grander scheme of things because you're still participating with tons of other people outside of the book community who are still reading her work, who are still supporting her, and who don't care about the nasty things that she's said and done, right? So like, if you really feel like you're nostalgic over Harry Potter and you love it and it was such a huge part of your life and you want to reread it, like, nobody's stopping you, but nobody's also telling you to post it on YouTube. So
the other thing is that like a lot of people are pointing out too, like there's so many other authors and like there's so many authors for coming from like underrepresented backgrounds and like there's plenty of other books like, and so like, yes, I personally did grow up with Harry Potter as a big part of my childhood and like have my own feeling about that. But like, it's easy enough to find something else to read that I'm kind of like, okay, like I don't feel any like conflict over J.K. Rowling right now because she's just like not on the radar of like my TBR. It's like, I got this other stuff.
Yeah, I think there's three distinct things here. One is that I will never spend another penny on anything J.K. Rowling. I just won't. I'm not gonna. That is my hard line in the sand for me personally.
Oh no!
Oh no! The J.K. Rowling.
The hard line in the chat.
J.K. Rowling has entered the chat and she has ended whatever Mari was saying.
Oh no.
Well, now we've taken over Maddie's channel.
Yeah.
What's everybody reading right now as we wait? I'm gonna read through the comments.
Yeah.
Wow, we're all really great now that Maddie's gone. We've just completely
fallen apart without our fearless leader.
Yeah. People are bringing up the point, like, just support authors of like the marginalizations that have been impacted by these problematic authors, which like I agree. Like I have a ton of Regency romances by people of color that I'm gonna be reading as soon as I'm done this for comparison to be like, look, you were wrong. Like we've completely taken over Mari's channel. Okay.
And it's also kind of like the same thing like we were talking about with like booktubers and like following like Black booktubers and not just making it about like, oh, J.K. Rowling did something bad. This is when we're going to talk about trans authors. Like it's got to be like always
just
like
ingrained in general into your reading. Yeah.
Sorry about that. So I was saying no money spent on her. And then I think the other thing is I'm never going to discuss her on my channel again. That's like a very definitive thing that I can say. Why I have no reason to discuss her work on my channel. And the third thing of like, will I ever reread the books that I've already read by her? To me, there is some separating the art from the artist that you can do. But like I think Deboki said it, she has trashed that so much that that doesn't exist for me anymore. I cannot imagine like ever getting to a place where I'm like, oh, like Harry Potter without thinking immediately, ooh, J.K. Rowling. So I have no desire for me personally to consume that again. And I think that varies from author to author, work to work, and whatever it is that they've done. So that's kind of like my take on that.
Also, the Harry Potter exceptionalism is kind of weird. Like Harry Potter is better than everything else, and then it's a category of its own. Like we've moved past that. I feel like there's more to life than Harry Potter. There's more to literature and fantasy than
it's only Harry Potter. Harry Potter is the only book that's been published in the past few decades. Like that in Twilight, there have been no other books.
Yes, the Twilight thing too, and like the constant like we are indebted to Twilight. We should be grateful to Twilight because of like the resurgence of YA. And I'm like, we can move on. We can move on. We don't owe like a blood debt to Twilight. I promise you, like we can move on.
The true YA dystopia is like the book that you can only read. It's like you can only read Twilight. You can only read Harry Potter. Those are the only books anymore.
Yes. I lost like a bunch of the comments when my thing kicked me out and restarted, like, so for the question. So I'm just kind of trying to scroll through here. If you guys see anything you want to highlight. Okay. I think that we can start wrapping up unless there's anything else that you guys saw while I was gone that you wanted to highlight or anything else that you wanted to address.
I mean, the J.K. Rowling stuff makes me also circle back to the beginning and thinking about like access to authors, because like so much of what she does is like borne out through Twitter, where you're like,
yes.
I have like I found it very healthy to follow as few authors as possible, like because I just get very little value out of it, and then it's like really only a handful where I'm like, okay, this is like actually interesting, and I feel like I don't know. I'm assuming authors are not being given a crash course in what Twitter is like and what is an effective way to use it as like a marketing tool, but like that whole notion of access and like what value it brings, like for me, I feel like all it's done is make me really mad at authors, not even for like just like this big stuff, but like it's made me mad at them for like little things where I'm like, this is not like for me anymore. Like you're probably an okay person, like not J.K. Rowling, but like most of the stuff that I get mad at, I'm like, this is just like an annoyance, but because of the way that Twitter and access works, like this is just not good. And so I'm going to disengage from as many of you as I can without like having to deal with this.
Yeah.
It's also interesting to see the authors that are impacted by these conversations, because I was talking to Maureen a couple of days ago now, because Beach Read is on my TBR because everybody was talking about it. But apparently that author wrote a YA book in 2016-ish that has some problematic elements, and nobody brought it up during the discussion of Beach Read. Like, I didn't even know that was a thing. So
I didn't either.
Now that impacts me. I'm like, I was going to pick that up immediately. And I'm like, well, I have other books that I could read. Like, it does impact your reading taste as well. But it's always like doing that research yourself to see. I always feel personally responsible because I am promoting books to make sure that I know where I can if the author has caused harm in some way, so I can make people aware of it.
Somebody asked a question. I didn't know if you guys heard that Ariel Bissett was allowed to pick the color for the reading challenge on Goodreads this year.
I saw her video.
Yeah, so somebody said if we think that is problematic that she was able to do that.
Goodreads is problematic.
Use Storygraph instead.
Sorry, for me, that is just purely from a place of pettiness. I just don't like Goodreads. They didn't do anything to me personally.
I saw it and I didn't even think twice about it. I'm like, why do people, like, no judgment, but like, why do people care about the color of like the Goodreads challenge? Like, I don't know. I was like, oh, she got to pick the color. Okay, cool. Scroll to the next video.
Yeah, I also felt that way. I feel like Goodreads is like it represents like the wider reading community to me, like in the way that like American Dirt on Twitter was received in one way, but then it was still a bestseller, like in the reading community as a whole. Like, that's Goodreads to me. It's so like vast and wide and out of touch with like smaller communities like BookTube and Book Twitter that whatever. Them picking Ariel to pick a color fit perfectly to me. I was like, yeah, that makes sense. So
I mean, I think like I don't know enough about Goodreads and how the color thing works and how they like marketed it. Like, I guess like if it were a conversation, it would be the conversation around who gets to have opportunities like that. Like, that is always like the thing. But for me, again, with Goodreads, I don't know how any of this works, so I don't feel like I have any strong opinion about it.
From what I know, she used to do like guessing videos where like, what's the color going to be this? And I think that's where the partnership came about.
Got it.
Yeah.
But also it just shows like companies aren't paying attention to what we're talking about online.
Not at all. They're so out of touch. They have no idea. Yeah. So it was just
that comes up when everyone talks about Goodreads, or at least everyone like in book community is like, why is this site so useless? So like, not like Goodreads color. Like,
All right. I think that I did my best kind of just scrolling through to see if I had missed anything else, but we're getting on 2 hours here. And I know for a fact that there was stuff that we did not bring up. So, I mean, there was, I'm not even going to list out like a bunch of the stuff because then we're just going to sit here and keep talking about it. But I promise you that I know that there was a bunch of other stuff in 2020 that happened that like sparked discourse and whatnot. But you know, I am both like the eternal optimist sort of side of me is like, I hope that we don't have this much stuff like to talk about in 2021, but also I'm like, I can't wait to talk to you guys again. See you soon, y'all.
I just want something fun. I want Dick Soapgate 2021.
Yes.
I want to understand how that happened. Why I want my 3-part documentary on how Dick Soap happened.
Yes, more Dick Soap, less racism 2021.
Yeah. Somebody quote tweet that and send it to Maddie.
All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us. You guys have been so wonderful in the comments and throughout the chats. And we hope that the next time I send them a last minute email to like join a live and they're all like, sure, Maddie, that you guys will also join us as well. Don't forget to subscribe to all of their channels. I think I already have it in the description, but if not, I will update it once this goes live or it gets published to YouTube. And again, thank you guys, and we'll see you around. Bye.
Bye.